Right, we're here with State Senator Terry Bryant. Senator Bryant, thanks for joining us. We're here to talk a little bit about the problem ongoing in many Illinois prisons, not
hmm
just Menard Correctional Center.
hmm
This has been an issue that's been ongoing for a long time now, but in Menard in particular, it's gotten worse over the past few weeks. The first question I have for you, Senator Bryant, is talk about your tour of Menard Correctional Center the other day. When you entered the prison, what were some of the things you saw, and what were the employees telling you?
Yeah, so I visited Menard Correctional Center just yesterday
Hmm.
and had with me a member of my staff, a 27-year veteran who served in every position from officer to all the way up to shift commander. And then I'm a 20-year veteran of the Department of Corrections. So going into the facility was not new for either one of us. I didn't do my career at Menard, but I did inspections there multiple times. And so walking in, the first thing that everyone wanted to tell us was thank you for being there. They didn't think anyone was listening to them about what's been going on. We did come in contact multiple times with individuals who had had a drug exposure, so we wanted to know from them if they were feeling better, if if they were having any residual effects, which all of them are still having ongoing headaches. Some of them still have elevated blood pressure. And we found out something new that I hadn't been told before, and that is many of these individuals are now had been tested and had very low blood oxygen levels, 80 and below in some cases. So while there are people out there who really don't understand what's going on, who are saying, "Oh, this might be psychosomatic,"
Hmm.
you can't fake your blood oxygen levels.
Right.
And so we saw a lot of that. I did talk to a food supervisor and he indicated because I wanted to know, there are questions about why is this happening only to staff and not to offenders. Well, I already knew that that wasn't true because on the first day that this really came to a head at Menard, there were 5 exposures, 3 staff, 1 offender, and 1 EMT responder who came from the ambulance service, right? So
Hmm.
I wanted to know were there more offenders who have been affected. This food supervisor told me that an offender had brought in what amounts to a very tiny little sliver of paper
Hmm.
that has been soaked in either K2 or fentanyl or some other drug, mixed that in with his spaghetti, and then ate it. So immediately upon consuming that, he went into I'm going to say fell out, right? So he
Right.
went into a emergency situation. They had to call a code 3, which in corrections is a medical emergency.
Hmm.
And I believe that that individual was taken out via ambulance. So we know that this is also happening to offenders, but the Department of Corrections is keeping that very quiet. And the offender families know, but so far you're the only one that is reporting that there's also offenders involved.
Right. You mentioned you're a former employee of
Hmm
corrections here in Illinois. Throughout your time as an employee with those corrections, obviously I know the prison system, no matter what, is a dangerous place to
hmm
work, a dangerous place to be. But have you noticed any changes from during your time in corrections to your tour you took just yesterday?
Yeah, it's a systemic change. So you've always had issues where you were on guard for drugs coming in or other contraband, like cell phones are very dangerous to have in an institution, shanks, right? So homemade weapons, anything that can, that can create a danger to the staff or other offenders there. I retired 10 years ago, and if you found a cell phone in the facility, the whole facility would lock down. If you found drugs in the facility, the whole facility would lock down, and sometimes the whole region, and sometimes the whole state, depending on what happened. Now, what we're seeing is very limited lockdowns. I believe Menard is on a level 1 lockdown, but it's a modified lockdown. So they're still getting all their workers, which, and when I'm hearing stories that one of the exposures happened in the dietary, why are workers still going out to their assignments? So it's very frustrating. The amount of drugs that are being found, that has not been true in the past.
Mhm.
Well, let me say that it has been true in the past
Right.
during the years right before the Richard Speck tapes were released. And people who remember the serial killer Richard Speck was given video equipment and pretty much given run of the institution that he was in. And then all of a sudden, the pendulum swung to a time when everything was a lot more strict.
Right.
That pendulum has swung totally in the opposite direction now. Every day, there's someone who is having some kind of drug exposure in every institution in this state. And in fact, I've been able to acquire 48, they're called reportables, 48 instances from 10 different institutions where there's either been a drug exposure, a staff assault, an inmate on inmate assault, and those drug exposures include staff and offenders.
And we have those full documents, by the way, which you provided
Mm-hmm.
to us, all complete, straight from the prisons. Let me ask you, let's say you were in the situation where you have someone who you are close friends with or related to who's in the prison system,
Mm-hmm.
incarcerated in the prison system, or an employee of the prison system. Would you feel safe today having them in the Illinois prison system?
Well, I have a 31-year-old son
Hmm.
who is an auxiliary police officer and a security personnel
Okay.
uh, for another
Hmm.
business.
I see.
I told him there's no way he's going to work for the Department of Corrections. Now he doesn't have to listen to mom, but he
Right.
knows I loved the Department of Corrections. I wouldn't have left my job for anything
Hmm.
except being elected to the Illinois legislature.
Hmm.
And I will not let my children go to work for the Department of Corrections. There's two major issues that cause it to be not beneficial to go to work for corrections or any state agency right now. One of those in corrections is that systemically, Governor Pritzker doesn't seem to be listening to the fact that he has a problem from his director all the way down, with the exception of one or two people, all the way down through his entire leadership team in the Department of Corrections. The second issue is when Illinois went to a Tier 2 pension, that Tier 2 now creates the requirement that someone in corrections work till they're 67 years old, and they have diminished benefits. I know we have a problem with pension payments in Illinois, but that problem is is not having people work till they're 67 years old in corrections doesn't solve anything. What it has done is caused people to not apply for the Department of Corrections. So a safety issue and the fact that um, you cannot stay safe yourself if you're in your 60s
Hmm.
working in an environment where the offenders are 20, 30, 40 years old and are allowed to pump up every day with weights, um, exercise, and so forth. And then at the same time, they're all jacked up on drugs.
Right.
So,
Staff shortages is another issue,
mhm.
that's not even directly related to the drug problem, but that's in all prisons throughout the state.
Well,
Um,
it actually does come into that
mhm.
issue because
Right.
when you're running shifts that have almost uh, the whole shift is mandated from a different shift, people are working tired, not just from that day, but often you'll find that people are mandated multiple times through the week to work those shifts, both at DHS, so at our mental health facilities, and then also at corrections. So I also represent Chester Mental Health. Chester Mental Health has some of the most dangerous people in all of Illinois, and I would argue in the United States, and yet they have these same issues of staff shortages.
Let's talk about the drug problem a little bit in particular. I know you mentioned a lot of what's been investigated so far. They're coming through the mail
Hmm.
in these prisons. Besides the mail, what are some other ways that you guys have been seeing with your visit to Menard and other places on how these drugs are getting into the prison
Yeah,
system?
so one I think might have been partially caused by the legislature. Last year, we passed a bill that said that you can't have styrofoam in state facilities any
Mm.
longer. I argued on the Senate floor that that was a really bad idea in regard to the Department of Corrections because often staff has to move from one place to another, or isn't able to go to the chow hall to eat their lunch. So styrofoam was the way that they took their meal to another place. As a response to that, the department has been allowing people to bring their own dishes in, so Tupperware dishes, things like that. Uh, and I don't believe the majority of the drugs are coming in through staff. I think about 90% or more is coming in through the mail.
Hmm.
But when you're trying to find a solution to a major problem, you have to start addressing what are all the possibilities. The possibilities are that it's coming in not only through the mail, but through volunteers, through
Hmm.
vendors, and through some bad staff. So I would suggest that we stop the practice of allowing individuals to bring their own dishes into the facilities. That would be one.
Mhm.
I would also suggest um, that we immediately um, increase the number of security that is at the Sally Port, at the gatehouse. And the main suggestion I've been fighting for about 5 years is to electronically scan the mail.
Mhm.
There's
And
other
that's the
states.
next thing I was going to get to.
Yeah,
Texas, Florida, Ohio have all implemented digital mail in state prisons.
yes.
Should
Well,
Illinois do
Randolph
this? Yeah,
Randolph County Jail,
right,
Jackson County Jail, Jefferson County Jail. So Jefferson has Big Muddy Correctional
right.
Center, and then of course Randolph County has Menard, and the county jail they already do it.
Mhm.
The Department of Corrections has been fighting me on this every step of the way, and
Mhm.
we're about ready to just run a bill that mandates them
That's what I
to
was
do it.
just going to
Yeah,
ask. Would you push for a bill to be
I,
introduced
I
to do
would,
that?
but to be honest with you, as much as I like Lieutenant Governor Stratton,
Mhm.
she personally told me that she didn't want the mail electronically scanned
Mhm.
because she wanted them to be able to touch and feel the mail. I get
Mhm.
the sentiment, but it's misplaced when it comes to the Department of Corrections. Safety has to be our number one issue. And electronically scanning the mail means they would see the exact piece of mail that they're getting. They
Mhm.
scan the envelope front and back. They scan the mail piece itself front and back. So the offender is just looking at it on a tablet as opposed to actually holding the piece of mail in their hand. They already have the tablets. We
Mhm.
already have the possibility for kiosk visits, right?
Mhm.
So, and then video visits. So we have the technology already in the Department of Corrections. We just don't have a leadership that has an appetite for doing it, and that appetite needs to change. Again, it's a systemic problem from the top to the bottom. The director of the Department of Corrections is a lovely lady,
Mhm.
but she is wholly inadequate to the task that's been placed before, and so are multiple members of her team.
Mhm.
Yesterday, I asked a question when we were at Menard about while the statewide TAC team was called in and they did a shakedown of the institution, one cell house at a time, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Procedurally, they're supposed to shut the water off in those cell houses while they're doing the shakedown. That's
Right.
so that an offender can only flush the toilet one time, right?
Mhm.
So let's face it, you can't always get everything to flush on the first try, right?
Right.
And there might be other items in there. Um, the normal procedure was overridden and the water was not shut off.
Mhm.
When I asked the chief of operations why the water wasn't shut off, he said, "Well, I just wanted to get the drugs out of here as fast as we could." And that's a little bit of a paraphrase, but that's the gist of what he said. And I said, "Well, you were already under suspicion of cover up." And then of course, no answer to that issue. But that's not the only place where they didn't shut the water off. They also
Uh-huh.
didn't shut it off at Big Muddy when they did the shakedown at Big Muddy.
I want to talk about something else that has also been mentioned, and we've had several people reach out to us anonymously who actually work at Menard, who
Hmm.
work at Big Muddy, EMTs included, that have responded to these calls. We had been hearing a few reports that some of the inmates and staff who are susceptible to these drugs have been taken to Chester, but some have also been taken by prison transport van to Carbondale ER. Do you know if that information is true? Is that something that?
I believe that is true.
Uh,
And
Now that I'll add that's against Region 5 medical code violations if that is done.
so I my understanding, and
Mhm.
I don't know if this is accurate, is
Mhm.
if you're taken by ambulance, then you have to go to the nearest health facility, right?
Right.
If they take them in a this is still I still don't have an answer for this.
Mhm.
If they take them in a institutional vehicle, or if they take them in someone's personal vehicle, if the person is coherent enough to say where they want to go, then I'm told that they're allowed to go where they want to go because I was told that some people were also taken to St. Louis. Now, if it's an offender, boy, somebody better answer that question pretty quickly
Mhm.
because you would think that you want to get them to the closest facility.
Right.
But I'm still a little bit concerned about why St. Clair County EMS was called in to do some of the testing that they did, and then most recently, uh, when well at Menard, when St. Clair County was contacted about the most recent exposures. They
Mm.
said they thought that you should have fresh eyes on it. So a special unit from the National Guard was called in night before last.
And that's something we wanted to make clear as well. When those initial reports went out, we
Hmm.
didn't know how the National Guard got there. The governor did not order the
Right.
National Guard to that facility. It was just as you
Yes,
described to me.
and there was an IEMA
Hmm.
individual who, again, a lot of these people don't want to be named because they're concerned for
Hmm.
their jobs, but told us that they were not notified. So
Hmm.
IEMA was not notified that a special National Guard unit was
Hmm.
going to come in. I think they were testing the air. There was an exposure that looked like it included the mailroom at Menard and also the warehouse. So the
Hmm.
FBI was also called in. When I visited Menard, I asked to be able to see all of the shanks that were found. I believe there were 8 of them on the previous day alone, and I wanted to see what drugs they were finding. They did allow me, after a little bit of pushing, to see the weapons that were found, but the drugs or the suspected drugs that they found at Menard were actually taken by the National Guard unit and I believe to the FBI lab. So
When you first wanted to get into Menard Correctional Center, you were denied.
correct.
What was the change yesterday for them to allow you in? What was?
Well, so there was no change in circumstances.
Uh-huh.
They were still on level 1 lockdown. When I got there on the previous Friday, I actually went there because I told that the chief that was coming from Springfield or Chicago was there to see if there was a carbon monoxide exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't go because of the drugs. I went because of the drugs and the possibility of carbon monoxide exposure because I wanted to see if they were going to be evacuating. And how big is this exposure? Do we need to be figuring out if Chester needed to have places that would
Mm-hmm.
be evacuated? So when I got there, they indicated to me they weren't going to let me in, and they said for my own safety.
Mm-hmm.
I told them I'm first of all in corrections I had to be certified for hazmat to wear the hazmat gear. It's been 10 years since I retired, but that really hasn't changed that much. I offered to put on PPE. When the chief came out, I talked to him, and he said, because I still hadn't been allowed in, and he said, "Oh no, there's no carbon monoxide exposure. We've checked that out." Okay, well, can I get in? No, still can't get in. And that came. Then he got a phone call from the director, still wouldn't let me in. But then when I went back yesterday, nothing really has changed. So I asked him, how come I couldn't get in last Friday? Well, what did change is that I did an official request on the Tuesday after Labor Day. They said they weren't letting me in because I hadn't made a request. That's bogus because I've gotten into a lot of facilities before when didn't have to make an official request. I don't know of other legislators who have been turned down when they show up at a facility in their district and ask to be let into the facility. But even more than that, if you're a retiree, now I'm not a retiree of Menard. I am a retiree of 5 and served at 5 other institutions. So um, they should have let me in just because I was a retiree. You're supposed to be able to go in and get a haircut if you want, get your shoes shined, eat lunch if you want to. But they didn't let me. Yesterday, no change other than the fact that I made an official request to get in.
One other thing I wanted to mention is for those that haven't been by or to right in front of Menard, a lot of people don't understand in comparison to other prisons like Big Muddy, Menard is in a very unique location,
Hmm.
a very difficult location for many different reasons, logistical. But I guess tell me, about the location of this prison. I guess why is it happening so often at Menard? Do we know in
Well,
comparison to Big Muddy?
I don't think it's happening any more often at Menard than
Mm-hmm.
anywhere else. I think that the Menard staff has finally let it reach such a peak
Mm-hmm.
that they're talking now.
Mm-hmm.
Other facilities have not been talking yet. Although
So are
I,
we seeing the, I mean, just what we put out today, 20 plus people in the past month,
yeah,
employees, not just inmates, but employees transported to hospitals.
yeah.
That's something we're seeing in every facility in
Well,
Illinois.
we saw 2 last night
Uh-huh.
at Pinckneyville, multiples at Big Muddy. In the documents that I gave
Right.
you, that was 48 instances, and that's just 10 facilities where I have people that were willing to give me documents
Mm-hmm.
about, and it's not all drug related. Some of
Mm-hmm.
it is staff assaults, but about 1/3 of that was Menard, about 1/3 was Lawrence Correctional Center. So I actually think there's just as big a problem, if not more, at Lawrence than there is at Menard. And one third was the other 8 facilities. Uh, there's 2 specific deputy directors that are over the uh, most of these facilities. Um, I think that those deputy directors
Mm-hmm.
are should receive a lot of the blame for why this is happening. It's their policies that the wardens have to execute,
Mm-hmm.
and those policies are passed down from Director Hughes. So if we don't have a change at the director level and at the deputy director level, then it's going to go on. But to your question, it's happening in every institution in the state. It just happens that sometimes the staff at Menard seems to be the ones that will speak out when something gets bad enough. And that's because they have the worst of the worst.
Mm-hmm.
They have an ongoing problem there where some rules were changed recently in one particular cell house. It's known as North 2, where the deputy director allowed for that unit to be changed in a way in their staffing. And that change now has created a problem because the individuals who are working that unit really don't have a lot of experience with those who are seriously mentally ill and also with those who are classified as Class E offenders, which are really high escape risk. They don't know how to deal with those offenders. So there's a lot of frustration amongst the staff at Menard, and they're just starting to speak out. And I think for a while, the hierarchy in corrections was allowing a lot of staff to be taken to the hospitals in private vehicles or in the institutional vehicles. And now that this is coming to light, now that everyone's talking about it, they're now a little bit more scared. So they're now being taken via ambulance. Where I think it's just a
Right.
little bit more in your face than it has been in the past. They've been very secretive about it.
One other thing that I wanted to mention is, at Menard in particular, there was one, and we'll put it on the screen, but one report where uh, corrections officer actually was unconscious.
Hmm.
Um, how much, until there is something done, a change, whatever that may be, whether that be digital mail, whether that be, changes in the system, how much longer is it going to be before that unconscious turns into a death,
This
you
one
know?
was pretty close because that individual became unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm told she convulsed, and then she was Narcaned twice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what we're seeing often is the Narcan doesn't always work on these synthetic drugs. And the synthetic drugs, when they're being tested, don't always test positive because it's a synthetic drug. So if you change one component of that ingredient, it will no longer test positive in the same way the previous drug did.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't fix how, it really doesn't matter what the substance is. The issue is that it's coming into the facilities. So rather than spending the department spending so much time trying to figure out what the substance is, they need to figure out how to keep it from coming in. And that starts with having enough staff, electronically scanning the mail, stopping those dishes from going in. Those are, and there's a couple other ideas that we have posed to corrections as well.
Have you or anyone else in the legislature, this is my last question, unless you have anything else to add, spoken directly to Governor Pritzker about this issue? And if so, what did he have to say?
No, I've not spoken directly to Governor Pritzker.
Mm-hmm.
We're cordial to each other when we're in a public setting. We don't really have a personal relationship at all, and I've made multiple requests in the past to
Mm-hmm.
speak to the governor. Those are they. I don't even get a denial on them. It's just kind of ignored.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, I'm talking to the media and I'm asking the governor to intervene in this. He has the power to do a top to bottom investigation on what's going on. I think he will find that at the very highest levels of the Department of Corrections, we have some really serious problems. Because it isn't just the drugs, there's a whole lot of other issues that are going on. And when I have the documentation to prove that, I'll be talking to you again.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to really get it stopped. So I'm happy to talk to Governor Pritzker. I would do that in a heartbeat if he would make that opportunity available. But at this point, I'm a little bit untrusting of the department investigating themselves. And so I'm hoping that we will have some uh, federal intervention to do these investigations.
Mm-hmm.
The staff of the Department of Corrections are fully capable of taking care of the department themselves, but we need investigators from the federal government to step in and look at this. Postal inspectors, OSHA needs to be looking at what's going on. I was happy to hear that the FBI was there. Their crime lab should definitely be testing all of these things. And then all of that information needs to be made public.
Mm-hmm.
The public has a right to know what drugs are floating around in the correctional facilities because it bleeds out into the general public.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're taking these offenders to local hospitals, the hospital staff and the general public needs to know. So I'm asking now for the governor to intervene, take charge of this situation, and make the changes that are necessary.
Senator Terry Bryant, thank you very much for
Thank you for
joining
having
us.
me.
Like I mentioned, this is an ongoing situation, and we'll continue to have more updates on it as they become available. But thank you very much, Senator, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the future. Thank
Thanks for
you.
having me.